Hello, I'm George Cairns, and I'll be guiding you through Teach Yourself Photoshop, a complete course to help you master the art of image editing. And in part 7 of your course, we're going to cover various ways to solve common problems like enhancing flat color, boosting midtone contrast, and removing dust and sensor spots, for example. But we'll kick off by opening this shot here. It's called Part 01 before, and if you open that up in Photoshop, it will automatically open in the Camera Raw editor because it's a digital negative file, it's a raw file, so it's going to open up as a raw image, which means there's much more color and tone information for us to play with. Now, at first glance, this shot looks okay, but it does need a bit of processing in the Camera Raw editor just to bring out some of the details that are missing due to a slight underexposure. Well, how do we know it's underexposed? Well, we have a histogram on the top here which shows us the spread of the shot's tones from the shadows on the left. You can see they're very strong, they're peaking quite high. We go through to the midtones and they're kind of petering out. And the brightest highlights should be up around here somewhere at the far right, but they've actually fizzled out well before you get to the brightest possible pixels. So what we can do is improve exposure using a variety of sliders to reveal more highlight and shadow detail and getting a better balance of tones between the darker shadows and the brightest highlights. Now, as well as being slightly underexposed, the shot is very orange looking too, and that's because the white balance isn't quite as good as it could be. But we can fix that by dragging the temperature slider to the left to cool things down. Now, as I do this, watch what the exposure up here in the histogram does. As I drag to the left, it cools things down, but it's also boosting the strength of the highlights and the midtones. So something like 2500 should do the trick. And it's always worth tweaking temperature if you have to before you start adjusting the other exposure sliders, because temperature does change exposure as well. So let's brighten things up using the exposure slider. Before I do that, I'm going to click here to turn on the highlight clipping warning. And then if we go to File with our adjustments, you'll see some red patches appear. These are the highlight clipping warning patches. That shows you the areas that are going to print out with no detail at all. So there's a little bit in the dog's eyes and on the sofa here. So we can see with the naked eye, it's really overexposed. We can see with the histogram, we've got a highlight peaking all the way up to the top, and the red patches are also warning us that we're losing highlight detail. So that's an extreme adjustment. Let's take that down until the clipping warning disappears. But we've got a healthier spread now from the shadows on the left to the highlights on the right. Now, as well as a highlight clipping warning, we also have a shadow clipping warning. If you click here, you'll see any shadows that are going to print out as pure black. And these blue patches here are showing inside the dog's ear that that's exactly what's going to happen, but that's actually okay. It's good to have a little bit of pure black in the shot as well as pure white, so you have a wide contrast range. So we could try and fill those in by dragging the fill slider to the right, but that's also filling in other midtones and shadows and creating a rather flat contrast. So take fill light back down to the left and allow yourself a little bit of clipping in the shadows. So we can see by clicking on preview, there's the before, very underexposed, slightly orange. There's the after, a healthier range of shadows, midtones and highlights. But we can actually create a more midtone contrast and bring out the shapes of the dog's head by actually darkening the shadows here a little bit. And we can do that by taking contrast and sliding it to the right. And that just spreads out the midtones a little bit and gives us a little bit of a darker detail here. And that helps us to model the dog's face by having a nice contrast between the brighter parts here and the darker midtones here. Again, there's the before, there's the after, and we now have a shot with a healthier range of tones and a healthier color as well. That is a great way to fix exposure problems in the raw editor. And if you find the clipping warning a bit distracting, you can press U for underexposed. That turns it off. And if you want to turn the highlight clipping warning on, you can press O for overexposed. So in this case, there are no clipped highlights, so that won't show us any red patches. So when you've finished editing your raw file, you can press done, and then when you reopen it, it will have the same settings, it will remember them. Or you could click open image and go into the standard Photoshop editor and then print out the shot perhaps. So that's how you fix common exposure problems in Camera Raw photos. And in part 2, we're going to have a look at another common problem, flat color. And we're going to show you how to enhance drab and dreary colors in the standard Photoshop editor. So see you in part 2.